Today on Future Forward, a world of divided media. What do you watch? What side are you on?
Then the sleeping giants controversy heats up.
And the uncertain future of ham radio. Yep, ham radio. I'm Steve Rosenbaum.
I'm Alexa Scordato.
Let us launch. Hey, Alexa.
Hey,
Happy
Steve.
sunny Sunday afternoon.
Yes, it's a hot one.
Indeed it is. Oh, you know what? I forgot to shut off the other Alexa in my life, and she's now yammering away in the background.
Typical.
Yeah.
Typical
All right.
of everyone who zooms with me.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say your name anymore. I'm going to have to come up with
Echo.
What? By the way, I did get another one of them in the living room, so now they talk to each other. It's quite strange. So we're gonna do the show in 3 sections, but there's also kind of a kicker piece at the end. And I just wanted to start out and just dive right into this divided media world piece because I think it's really interesting. Let me just start by asking the question. Did you go to see Hamilton in a theater, or did you watch it on Disney Plus?
I did get to see Hamilton in the theater.
I am incredibly jealous.
Yeah, it was amazing. Amazing. The original cast too.
So I did not. And actually, it's a funny story. My mom offered me tickets early in the show's run, and I just was busy and said, nah, it's okay. Something political, I'll need to go. Bad call.
Man, missed opportunity.
Yeah, very foolish. But so I watched it on Disney Plus, 4th of July weekend, and the scheduling was brilliant, right? Because America, history of America stuff. That being said, the battle between Trump in front of the etched out faces of presidents versus I couldn't decide if everyone I knew watched it at the same time as some kind of a political statement, or if it was just kind of a natural outpouring of, I don't want to watch Trump, but I will watch this instead. There was some calling.
There's something for everyone. It obviously was this cultural phenomenon when it still is on Broadway, but Broadway's closed. But when it debuted, so this was filmed in, I think, August of 2016. And so you can imagine that when audiences saw that, they probably felt like, okay, wow, we're in an election year and a lot is on the line, right? And to sort of fast forward 4 years later, have the Black Lives Matter movement and Trump in office, it's interesting because I obviously haven't seen Hamilton in now 4 or 5 years, and I kind of consumed it in a totally different way.
Oh, so you did watch it. You did watch it as well when it replayed in the video version.
I did, and I've actually seen it twice now since it aired. I'm one of those Hamilton nerds.
So tech question: did you have buffering problems with it?
I did not.
I had horrendous buffering problems with it.
When did you watch it? Like a Friday when it debuted?
4th of July evening.
Okay.
And there's been some rumors of buffering problems, but no one's, Disney has never announced the numbers. They won't say how many people watched it. But even if it were unbelievably, shockingly, jaw-droppingly massive, which I think it might have been, the buffering would still have been inexcusable. That being said, I did get some advice. We watched about the first 25 minutes and then the buffering failed. And so the next night we came back to finish it. And some people had said since then, watch it with captions on. And I did. And that actually made the storytelling clearer.
Did you read the Ron Chernow book?
No.
So it's actually worth reading that as a text, because it actually makes you appreciate Lin-Manuel Miranda's work even more, because the songs so perfectly encapsulate this very dense historic biography.
Yeah. Now, having said that, I loved it and that you obviously loved it, on my Facebook, there was all kinds of people complaining about they didn't like the production. They thought they'd seen it in the theater, and the video didn't encapsulate the sense of overwhelming the sound and the majesty of the production and all of these. It was like a whole theater nerd like uprising.
Beggars can't be choosers. We're still stuck at home. We like can't, I'll take it.
And then a friend of mine who I've known for a gazillion years posted, how many people in the audience were counting lighting cues? And I have to confess, I was a little bit counting lighting cues because I'm a theater nerd, and I was like, that was it was, but I think I would still like to see it in the theater without the original cast, and even I just think
I thought it would have been cool if they filmed it sort of like different seats, and then maybe release like a VR edition where you could sort of pick, I want to be in the first row center balcony, or I want to be in the 10th row center orchestra. And then you could actually watch it from those different.
I guess I thought it was going to be more handheld, on stage, close to the characters, which I guess I didn't see it, but I guess there was a version of Rent filmed that way that was much less proscenium arch audience shot and much more. And a bunch of my theater nerd friends said, no, that would have been actually even more terrible.
Yeah.
But here was what I took away from it politically. That this idea of a battle over this thing called the Republic and how taxation works and how finance works and rivalries and, like, that's not new.
Bipartisanship and big government, small government is an age-old debate.
So that almost made me feel good. Like, this Trumpian nonsense has a history of being part of the complicated. And by the way, the King character was unbelievably spectacularly funny, painfully brilliant.
How'd you feel about the casting?
You mean in terms of the individual performers, or in terms of it?
And the fact that it was like diverse, you're literally watching founding fathers being played by people of color.
Well,
does that throw you for a little bit?
So I'll ask you the question, because my immediate, I actually thought about this in terms of a question I wanted to ask you, which is like, so if you can take white characters and play them with black people, why are all the women in the entire show in a secondary role?
Ooh, so I actually don't interpret the women necessarily in a secondary role, because if you think about the entire ending of the show, sorry, spoiler.
Yeah.
It's like you have it's called Hamilton, and someone tweeted this. I can't even take credit for this being an original thought. It's not called, the musical is not Alexander Hamilton. The movie's Hamilton because what you learn at the end is Eliza is the person who's actually responsible for telling the story. Right. And there's that lyric, who lives, who dies, who tells your story.
Yeah.
So obviously Hamilton passes away and Eliza lives for 50 more years. And to live past your 80s during that time was such a feat. And so she goes on to do all of these things. And so I actually found that the women in the story were actually really powerful.
I guess I was thinking more about the women in the chorus.
Okay.
Like the women played women, and black actors played white actors, but there wasn't any decision to say, wait a minute, like I just don't know where the, we're going through a moment in time when there's all kinds of issues with cartoons about white voice actors playing black characters, and it's happening on The Simpsons and a bunch of other places. So I just found myself thinking, he could have, I don't know. I don't know where that line is, and I'm not sure.
Oh, you're saying maybe like Aaron Burr is played by a woman.
Oh,
okay.
And cool. I also, found myself thinking a lot about giving your son the advice to raise your gun in the air, and then after that, it turns out to be a terrible tragedy to do the same thing. It's like, really?
Oh my gosh! I mean, Hamilton's arrogance, clearly his downfall.
All right. So moving on, we watched Hamilton. We loved Hamilton. Not only did I not watch Trump on the 4th of July, but I didn't watch the rebroadcast or the news coverage, or I just was like, nope, not interested in imbibing in that. And so but which was the thesis of chapter 1 of this podcast, which is kind of divided world, pick your media. You know, either you watch Fox News or you watch MSNBC, but you don't watch both. Either you watch Hamilton or you watch Trump. Don't watch both. I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not proud of that. I just think it is what it is.
Yeah. No, I would.
So a couple more things I want to just make sure we get to. What did you make of this? The Chicago Police Department shutting down its arrest API. I would have liked to have been in the room where that decision was made. That struck me as whatever the opposite of transparency is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for context, right? It's basically it's being it's like a digital cover up, right? The idea is that if you have access to the API, you have access to the data, all of a sudden now you can start to manipulate and expose that data to reveal certain patterns. I don't know. I thought this story in general was interesting. I don't know who would be savvy enough in a typical police department to sort of make that call.
I don't remember if I told this story on the podcast or not about Pam and I and our run-in with the police in New York a couple of years ago.
No, at least not to my knowledge.
So a couple of years ago, we went to Lincoln Center out of doors, and it was a hip hop concert. So it was not your conventional kind of white little old lady sitting on folding chairs Lincoln Center crowd. It was a more, a younger, blacker audience, and there was an enormous police presence, like bizarrely so. Like someone thought there was going to be a riot and they had riot cops there. It was bizarre. Everyone was totally chilled. There was nothing that even resembled bad activity. When we were walking back, we'd gone to get a drink or something. When we were walking back, there was a fence to where our seats were that was kind of open, and we slipped through it. And this cop, I walked through it. I mean, maybe we were going in the exit or doing something kind of slightly, whatever. I mean, we weren't breaking any laws, but we probably were going in the exit. And I walked through, and this cop put his hand on Pam's shoulder and grabbed her and was really rough with her, like shockingly rough with her. Oh, and she was upset. And we went to his boss and said, look, this is a nice outdoor event. We don't know why you're all here, and we don't know why you're grabbing people. But it was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt like I was on the not pleasant side of an encounter with a police officer. It was very unpleasant, and his boss wasn't particularly concerned and said, file a report. And so we did with the Civilian Review Board. I did, and they called us up and said, the only thing we can do is have you come in and face the cop and essentially accuse him of being inappropriate in the way he pushed your wife around. And I said, well, I just want to know, is this then we got a little scared. Like, is this a problem cop, and are we exposing ourselves to him? Is he in our neighborhood? And so I tried to get background on him. Has he been charged before? Did he have other civilian complaints? And it was all completely locked up. Mm-hmm. All the data about police accusations and settlements was completely not available to the public.
Yeah.
Which I had no idea. I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, he's an employee of city government. If he's been accused, because I wanted to know if he was dangerous, and if we were, and that law, I don't know if it's a law, I guess it is a law or a rule, has just been lifted in New York. Mm-hmm. So that you now get information about complaints against police officers.
Yeah, a sex offender lives in your neighborhood, and that's like publicly known information. If the people in charge of keeping you safe have also had complaints of maybe not keeping you safe, that should be equally available as information.
And it's been a battle going on for a long time. But I was really glad to see New York State, essentially fix what immediately is information I wanted. And so reading this Chicago story struck me as deeply troubling for our listeners. This is a story about the Chicago Police Department shutting down their arrest API so that you couldn't easily find out about arrest patterns.
And it looks like, I mean, one of the things I sort of interpreted from the article is that maybe they were trying to spin the presence and the arrests like in relation to looting. But what the data was actually showing is that most of the arrests were related to protesting. And then they issued a statement saying that, oh, this API is like not being maintained and monitored. And so we've like pulled it. And yeah, but then obviously people complained, and then they made an update on Friday saying that I guess now
the data portal is open again.
Yeah.
With anonymized arrest data. And by the way, credit where credit is due. One of the things the Bloomberg administration did extraordinarily well in New York was drive really hard toward city data transparency in all kinds of interesting, positive ways. You know, we talk about, you know, New York City and big apps competition and data in New York another day. But yeah, Chicago, glad you fixed it-ish, but it made me want to go and play with the API and see what we could learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Like a good app with it.
All right, so let's talk about sleeping giants.
Oh man.
I read everything I could about this story.
I did not dig in as much, but when the news broke, I was like, there's no organization, I think, anymore that is sort of safe. And I'm just waiting for all of these leaders to sort of like topple down around me. Like no one, I'm putting no one on a pedestal anymore.
So I guess I didn't even really know. I thought sleeping giants was more like, I don't say hobby exactly, but I guess I didn't think it was a business in the way that, you know, it seemed more like at least from the outside, like a bunch of co-collaborators trying to make change in a positive way. So the fact that there was a wrestling match over, I wouldn't call it exactly ownership, control, public, I don't even know what. But here, you summarize. What exactly?
It's like it's status. It's like there's usually a founding team, right? That sort of contribute to the success of an organization. And so you had basically a scenario where the white male co-founder sort of takes all the credit and really pushes down the other people from the spotlight.
But you know, I don't know enough to say this one way or another, but I do know that there are historically lots of battles about co-founder titles that people decide they want retroactively. And she does talk in her letter, in her public letter, pretty openly about the fact that, you know, she wanted a title and she went to him and asked for a title and got, what was it? It was like co-organizer. She didn't get a co-founder title, but she said she didn't ask for one.
I'm like trying to find.
Yeah, because the article, the first sentence is how my white male co-founder gaslighted me out of a movement we started.
Founding organizer was the title. Yeah.
So let's put the male female part aside. If it were two women or two men, so there was no sense of bias, can someone who was the number 2 employee at a company but not a co-founder decide that retroactively they think they hey, you know, as I think about it, I was there for all the hard work, I think I'm a co-founder, and essentially claim that title? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about acknowledgement. And I definitely have seen a precedent of individuals who maybe were not recognized as co-founders originally, but they were part of a core founding team. And maybe after years, they sort of establish a formality where maybe instead of the first 3, the first 10 are actually maybe titles or whatever, but like again, there's a formality around being a founder or founding team member.
So here's what I find interesting about this. Like, co-founder, to me, I immediately think of stock and equity and how much shares, and and do I did I vest my like, which is not the case as I understand it with Sleeping Giants. I don't get the sense that they're planning to go public or do anything economic. But I mean, if you started a company with two other co-founders at the outset, you would all have a vote, right? And the decisions would be made collaboratively, and there'd be some understanding that the mechanism of how they're going to move forward, that there would be some equitable negotiation about that.
Yeah.
So at the risk of getting haters all mad at me, I'm not sure that you can be a co-founder retroactively. I think that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. It's like it depends on how you want to define it. But I mean, the crux of this issue is really just about recognition,
Yeah.
right? So assuming money and capital or equity is like not is negligible. You had an instance of Matt,
Yeah.
the co-founder, like give explicit direction to stay out of the spotlight. Like, do not take press requests. Like, if you speak at the touring festival and they list you as a co-founder, like that is incorrect. I mean, at some level, that just feels so petty.
Yeah, and unnecessary. Like what? Yeah. I
mean,
mean, oh no,
like
no. Matt comes off terribly. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And more importantly, their squabble notwithstanding, Sleeping Giants has done awesomely good work.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially pointing crowdsourced economic feedback at big brand sponsors and getting them to own up to the, if they're putting money in Breitbart or, doing things that, so it is certainly a shame that this is the story that's coming out about Sleeping Giants, given how much we need that kind of organization.
Yep. I mean, it's like, it kind of reminds me of like another version of the crisis text line. Like I said, it's like, here you have people who are doing good work in the world, but are like fundamentally flawed as leaders and people.
Yeah. That's kind of what I thought of too, which is why I thought it was good to talk about. All right. Which brings us similarly to the story about the letter. And I have to say, the Harper's letter, I'm a little late to this story. It kind of crept up on me a little bit. I saw it. I think I saw it on Twitter somewhere. I went, oh, that's kind of interesting. But it does seem like it's getting bigger, not smaller.
Yeah. So had you been following, I guess, the J.K. Rowling canceling controversy, I guess?
Yes, but I got to confess, I don't exactly understand it. I mean, I've not read deeply enough to fully understand it. I know she's in the middle of a debate, and I didn't exactly understand her position. It's trans women, right?
Mm-hmm. So there was an incident in December, but the most recent one is that she commented around an article about menstrual health in the time of COVID. And I think the journalist was specifically using language like people who have their periods. And J.K. Rowling, I'm just paraphrasing, basically said like, people who have their periods, you mean women. And I think sort of the specificity of her definition of woman is not inclusive or does not address sort of the broader trans definition. Anyway, it's just about gender, the spectrum, right, and how the language we use can really start to create very rigid definitions of what is. And so I don't know, it's just something that she was criticized. And not only did she sort of not acknowledge like, oh, I hurt you or whatever, but really doubled down on her position that like she was right.
So the Harper's letter, for those of you who have been living under a rock for the last 10 days, 153 I'm going to read you just a clip from the Objective. On Tuesday, 153 of the most prominent journalists, authors, and writers, including J.K. Rowling, Malcolm Gladwell, David Brooks, published an open call for civility in Harper's Magazine. So civility and a call for civility would seem to be a pleasant thing, a good thing. How it's turned into a hornet's nest, I don't exactly, maybe everything does now. Maybe that's the answer, is you can't have an open call for anything without there being a blowback. But she, the pushback was, you're being not inclusive and calling for civility, So it's almost like two unrelated but highly complicated things bumped up against each other, and all hell broke loose.
Yeah. And this is also kind of like on the heels of the VC Taylor Lorenz debate. Did you follow that at all? So Taylor being the New York Times writer, and then the VC is basically like just talking about cancel culture, and should a journalist in the New York Times be speaking the way she is on Twitter and not maintaining objectivity. Yeah, there's actually like a lot to unpack here.
So here's, I guess, the bigger story that I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who know my history, I have a long, somewhat storied history of passionately believing in user-generated content and empowering voices and giving people the tools to tell their own stories. And there's a part of me, and I don't claim that I invented anything like that, and I think it would have happened with or without me, but we did MTV Unfiltered, and we did a lot of user-generated stuff early, fundamentally with the core belief being the media should not be authoritarian, top-down. Big people that own transmitters and vans and trucks and cameras get to and printing presses and barrels of ink get to speak, and all of us sit quietly and consume television or print and are the receivers of the wisdom down from the mount. And so, I have, for most of my career, believed that conversation is better than speech making. And this was the first time, looking at this story, that I thought, yeah, maybe this is some of the things that I facilitated and believed in kind of run to their inevitable extreme, which is that everything's a debate, everything's an argument. And there's always someone trolling through Twitter looking for something to argue with, or, disagree with, or attack, or, diminish. And from the standpoint of the people who wrote the civility letter, would they have been happier if it had just plunked out in the world and not had a ripple? Or is this as good an outcome as they could expect, which is we're talking about their letter? Yeah, I don't think I unpacked it, did I?
I assume that, if they were to publish anything, that the outcome they wanted is exactly this debate.
But not civil debate.
I guess, what is civility, right?
I don't know. Civility is, please and thank you and excuse me and would you mind wearing a mask? And, as opposed to, hey, fucking idiot, wear a mask, which is kind of more where we are right now.
Yeah.
Civility. What is civility? That's a good one. Maybe I have to reread the article and see if they try and answer that, but I don't think they do.
So what what are your top 3 takeaways from, I guess, the story or the letter itself?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot. I think that however we're going to communicate online, we're lacking not just rules and societal norms, but technology and platforms So I'll give you an example of what I was thinking. So I joined an experiment that TED was running a while ago, and they use a platform called Circle. And I arrived at this Circle thing thinking I would lurk. I was like, I'll just watch. Turns out you can't lurk. It's 12 people. Everybody's on some version of Zoom or whatever their video platform is. Everyone is in a circle with little circles around them. There's a person who is a facilitator. There's essentially a talking stick. Everyone introduces themselves. You get 30 seconds to say who you are and what you believe, what the subject is. Then they play a video. Then there's a conversation. But it's a facilitated, structured conversation. And nobody gets mansplained, and no one gets, overspoken, and everyone gets its voice. And I mean, it wasn't perfect, and I wrote about it. There were some things about it I didn't think were quite right, but I ended up feeling I learned a lot, heard some new voices, got to speak equally with my 12 other cohort members, and it made me think that the internets, absent that, are really currently rewarding people who are the most obscene.
Mm-hmm. And like attention grabbers, the loudest, the most like viral savvy content.
Troll. I mean, I guess not to put too fine a point on it, I'm talking about Reddit mostly, and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, but like I have a whole, and I lose this argument as often as I win it, but I have a whole thing about pseudonymity and people essentially going on Reddit and saying horrible things behind the curtain of an identity that doesn't tie to a human being. So that was what I took away was the letter illuminated the lack of a civil platform, which it would be nice to see grow up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably like hours of debate that we could spend on this, but I think thematically, what you can sort of tease apart is this idea that, if you're a publisher, if you're a voice, if you're a journalist, to what extent can you remain objective versus opinionated, and the context around it, right? Like for me, when I see this article or this letter, and I think about the need for social media guidelines as sort of, I don't know, a safeguard, I guess, against being canceled on the internet, I actually don't even know if something like that can work, right? Like a lot of the examples that they cite here, whether that's like an editor who lets an editorial run, or someone who like speaks openly on Twitter and maybe those views don't reflect that of their employer. I actually just don't know how one single document can sort of govern all of the digital interactions and content that could be created, right, by individuals or the entity itself.
I agree, but can I just add one little celebration of cancel culture?
Mm-hmm.
Almost nothing made me happier this week than the guy from Dartmouth who was a writer for Tucker Carlson, but had a pseudonym and was publishing just unbelievably, viciously horrible, garbage, racist, miserable stuff, and was outed. And was it Dartmouth or Cornell? I should check that. I thought it was Dartmouth. I should get that right. But essentially was outed, and he said essentially everything that's in front of the teleprompter that Tucker Carlson reads, I write. But then this other name that wasn't him was writing just like, and it was, I guess, on a discussion board for attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
Just incredibly vicious, shockingly vicious stuff, and just was immediately, thank you very much, here's the door, you're fired by Fox News, essentially the moment that it was outed.
Yeah. So I don't know where my personal views land on the spectrum, but what is touted as cancel culture, I understand the criticisms of it, which is like sometimes there's a mob mentality where it's like easy for someone to get canceled without hearing the other side of the story. But in broad strokes, for me, cancel culture is really just consequence, right? And I think what we're experiencing right now is that there's a strong desire by the public to sort of hold people accountable, right? And so when people are getting canceled, I think it's really just kind of exposing or bringing light on maybe questionable behaviors, words, or sentiments that beg a conversation.
Yes. By the way, it was Dartmouth.
Yeah.
All right. Just wanted to make sure I didn't leave that hanging out there. By the way, which begs the question of why they couldn't just cancel Tucker while they're at it. But, no. So, but somehow I don't know where there's a firewall between his horrible writer writing horrible things for him to say. And anyway, all right.
Like contracts, personalities, and I don't know.
All right. Last but not least, let's talk about ham radio. So this is a piece from our friends at IEEE Spectrum. Have you ever been a ham radio operator?
I have not.
I was trying to remember if I ever have been. It seems like something I would have done in high school, but I don't remember doing it. So I'm going to say I probably wasn't, although I do remember a lot of conversation about the FCC when I was running college radio stations, being fairly deep into communications law relative to what we had to do to keep our license. So ham radio is not the internet, right? It's it's some community of kind of techno geeks from another era, and truck drivers, and 10-4 Good Buddy, and that great sound. I wanted to be concerned about the future of ham radio, but I came away from this article not sure it was worth fighting for, which is again going to get me hate mail, but it is what it is.
I can see it both ways. So again, as someone who has not used ham radio, it feels similar to, I think, maybe what people think of as like indie web makers, sort of like tinkers on the web who maybe like make their own like homegrown websites and play around with technologies that maybe aren't stable or have longevity. But yeah, I mean, the pros for it are like anything that maybe any medium, or tech that enables creation and self-expression is good. But in terms of like maybe what you're saying, Steve, is like, I don't know if this is a battle worth fighting for. It's like there are other solutions out there that are potentially better, easier. I don't know, like this.
But
you can StreamYard podcast.
But to be fair, I mean, ham radio does have rules and behaviors and accepted norms that this flashes back to what you were saying about about the Harper's letter. I mean, again, always hard to know what things people are protecting because they're nostalgic, and what things people are protecting because they actually fill a role that won't be filled by Reddit or 4chan or whatever. I mean, is there a ham radio replacement? I'm not sure it's YouTube. I'm not sure it's Facebook. I mean, there's a reason why we've gone to a live format, right? Which is it's a little more casual. We get to kind of not have to make it quite so polished, and sometimes people jump in and want to talk to us and ask us questions, and we like that too. By the way, I put up our Twitter handles just so we'd have them on the screen. I think we're out of time-ish. Ham radio operators, if you are listening to this podcast and you'd like to clue us into what we got wrong about why we should passionately fight for ham radio, let us know. That would be good to do. And we should do something different next week. What should we do? Should we have snacks?
I don't know. Maybe we'll have a guest next week.
We could have a guest. StreamYard likes guests. Who
Mhm.
should it be? Who do you know? Who do you know that's brilliant and opinionated and doesn't have enough media outlets that we should scoop them into our conversation?
Probably a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so.
I just found out recently my coworker coded Clear Health Costs. Remember we did the show on that?
Yep, yep.
She was a developer who built it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's totally cool.
Yeah.
Well, all right, we'll find a guest for next week. By the way, this is another example. If any of you have thoughts about who should be, maybe you should be a guest. Maybe you're sitting there listening going, you know what? Why am I not on this program? I should be a guest. Well, that would be an excellent thing. Just tweet at us, Steve. I'm at Magnify Media, and Alexa is at Alexa because she rocks. And with that, we will say goodbye.
We'll
See you next week.